The sign of the Son of Man. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. And God said, Let there be light in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. Amos chapter 8 and verse 9. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord Yahweh, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. August the 2nd, 2027, 12 p.m. Jerusalem Standard Time. Solar eclipse visible in Jerusalem, Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 29. As a result, you'll wander aimlessly in broad daylight, just as a blind person wanders in darkness. You will not succeed in anything you do. You will be constantly oppressed and continually robbed with no one to save you. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 30, the New International Version. You will be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and rape her. You will build a house, but you will not live in it. You will plant a vineyard, but you will not even begin to enjoy its fruit. Zechariah prophesies what the day will look like in Jerusalem when the Lord Jesus intervenes to save the Jews. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 6. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 7. But it shall be one day which shall be known to Yahweh, nor day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. What is the situation on that day? Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 2. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 8. In the whole land, declares Yahweh, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it. On that day his feet will stand on the mountain of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the mountain of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 20. And all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Disclaimer: Jesus returns to judge his household long before this day as a thief. His bride is already with him. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 5. So Jesus has already returned to the earth before the 2nd of August 2027. On the Mountain of Olives in Jerusalem, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. The tribulation of those days is what most term the Great Tribulation. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 21. It is the time of Jacob's trouble. This period is actually describing the atrocities of the nations when they are gathered against Jerusalem to battle up to and during Armageddon. Revelation chapter 16 and verse 16. 2/3 of the Jews are killed. Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 8. Jesus must intervene to save the Jews. Shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light? When the sun is darkened and the moon does not give her light, this can indicate a literal solar eclipse. This can only occur when there is a new moon. And the stars shall fall from heaven. The sun falls from heaven when it is in motion to set. Since the sun is being blocked by the moon, you can see the stars are setting or falling from heaven. If you can see the stars falling, that means the earth will turn much faster than normal. More on this later. And the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. The earth will shake with an extremely violent earthquake. It will look like the heavens are shaking. This phenomenon will be seen because of the movement of the stars at night worldwide. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 27. For as lightning comes out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Stars may look like lines instead of dots going from east to west in the sky. It can be seen everywhere. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 30. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The sign of the Son of Man appearing in heaven constitutes a celestial miracle. It happens on the day of a great earthquake. This all happens when Jesus Christ comes in power and great glory. Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse 10. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice, and lifted up his hand on high. Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse 11. The sun and the moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. The sun and the moon will remain eclipsed for 3 hours. Matthew chapter 27 and verse 45. The Bible confirms past celestial miracles. As a result, an entire day has been lost. Joshua chapter 10 and verse 13. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hastened not to go down about a whole day. Compare also Isaiah chapter 38 and verse 8. Prophetic evidence suggests the earth will rotate faster. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 7. But it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. The solar eclipse would normally be over in the afternoon. Amos chapter 8 and verse 9. I will cause the sun to go down at noon. The earth will start to rotate faster starting at noon. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 29. And the stars shall fall from heaven. The motion of the stars will be detected by the naked eye. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 27. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. The stars will move across the sky like lightning from east to west. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 22. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. Speeding up the earth literally shortens the day. Amos chapter 5 and verse 18. Woe unto you that desire the day of Yahweh, to what end is it for you? The day of Yahweh is darkness and not light. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 1. Behold, the day of Yahweh comes. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 2. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief.